Hi, I'm Charlie Hansen. Fly fishing can be exciting and a lot of fun, whether you're catching fish on the surface of the water or below the surface. If you can learn how to choose the right flies, develop the skills to make them look and act like their natural counterparts, you'll be catching more and bigger fish than you thought possible. Let's start with nymph fishing. Nymph fishing is the easiest and most effective way to catch fish. Nearly 80% of the food that fish feed on lives under the surface of the water. That is why learning all you can about this aquatic life is so important. The more you learn about this important food source, the easier it'll be to choose the right flies. Some fly patterns will imitate one specific nymph. Other fly patterns will imitate a variety of aquatic forms, such as hare's ears or San Juan worm. My son Clint, his friend Josh, and I will be fly fishing the Upper Green River today. Normally, one of the first things we'll do is stop at a local fly shop to get the latest information on what flies the fish are taking. Another way you can find out what the fish are feeding on is to go along the edge of the river, turning over rocks to see which nymphs are underneath them. If you've never done this before, I think you will be surprised at the number of scuds, leeches, and other aquatic life that you will find. After matching the flies that were in our fly boxes to the aquatic forms that we found under the rocks, it was only a short time until Clint, Josh, and myself were catching fish. Although we found a lot of leeches, our most effective patterns were scuds and San Juan worms. Josh shows off one of several nice rainbows that he caught that afternoon on a San Juan worm. The Upper Green River has many forms of aquatic life, so you'll need to have a good variety of flies. This river also has large and hard-fighting trout that will require the stronger 3 and 4X tippets in order to land them. The Upper Green doesn't have the trout population that some of the other rivers have, so you may have to fish several of the runs and pulls in order to catch some of its larger fish.
He's got to go 6-7 pounds or more. Mark it there and I'll measure it. I got a tape.
Fish spend a lot of their time feeding on or near the bottom of a stream or river. The easiest way to determine the distance that you'll need between your flies and your indicator to allow the flies to drift along the bottom is to times the depth of the water that you'll be fishing in by 1.5. Other factors that you'll need to consider are the diameter of your leader and how fast the water is flowing. Larger leaders and faster water will both require more weight to get your flies to drift along the bottom. Here on the Platte, like the Upper Green River, drifting scuds and San Juan worms along the bottom produced a large number of fish. During the day, when multiple hatches were taking place, mayfly nymphs in sizes 18, fish with mixed pupas in sizes 20 and 22, drifted 24 to 30 inches below the surface of the water, was also effective. Other parts of a good presentation are knots, the distance between your flies, where the weights are placed, and how much weight you use. Let's start with the surgeon's knot. This knot can be used to attach the tippet to your leader. It can also be used to tie different sizes of tippets together. A surgeon's knot can be tied by making a loop. After the loop has been formed, pass the ends of your lines through it a couple of times. When the knot is completed, you'll have a long and short leader that the flies can be tied to. Here is what the actual setup looks like. This is the rig that I prefer to use when I'm fishing with 4X and larger tippets. Here is a setup that is used by most fly shops. It is known as a 2-foot rig. It is called that because there are 2 feet between the two flies, and then there is another 2 feet between the main fly and where the weights are placed. The advantage to this one is that it is less likely to tangle up. It took a number of flies and a good presentation for us to catch fish on the Platte and the Upper Green Rivers. Spring creeks may require even more flies and a better presentation if we are going to be successful at catching the large rainbows that occupy many of them. Trout are harder to catch on a spring creek because of the clear water and the complex hatches. When fishing in this type of water, you can easily see if the fish are interested in your flies. I'll often go through a dozen or more flies just to find one or two flies that the fish are interested in. Today, Garrett and I will show you some of the ways to catch the large rainbows that occupy many of the spring creeks. Let's start by taking a few minutes to run our nets under the moss. This will give us a good idea of what the fish are feeding on. As you can see, the fish have plenty of food to choose from. The two aquatic forms that we are the most interested in are sowbugs and scuds. Since they are similar in color and size, I'll often fish the same pattern to imitate both of them. Once we saw that our net had both scuds and sowbugs, we knew that this was one of the patterns that we would be fishing. San Juan worms are the attractor patterns that I'll often fish with a trailer fly. After deciding which flies to use, you'll need to size your tippet. You can do this by dividing the size of the flies that you'll be fishing by 3. One of the advantages of fishing a spring creek is that a lot of the time you can see the fish that you're fishing to. By taking a few minutes to study them, you'll discover how important it is to present your flies to the fish in the same way that they are used to seeing the naturals. Scuds and earthworms are abundant in most waters and are a high source of protein. That makes them an important part of a fish's diet. Because fish feed on scuds and earthworms year-round, my fly boxes usually contain many flies that will imitate them. Both of these aquatic forms can be found in the stream beds, so when I'm fishing scuds and San Juan worms, I'll fish them close to the bottom of a stream. This will place them in the same area where the fish are used to seeing their natural counterparts. Even though scuds and San Juan worms were effective during the morning hours, as time went by the fish started to show less interest in them. As it got closer to noon, Garrett noticed that some of the mayflies had begun to hatch, so we switched flies and began fishing a pair of mayfly nymphs. By studying the fish, I've discovered they are more likely to take the nymphs if they drag across the top of the moss instead of drifting over it. After switching flies, it took Garrett only a short time before he hooked into this rainbow. They are 4 groups of mayflies: clingers, crawlers, swimmers, and the type that'll burrow into the bottom of a stream. There are many subspecies of mayflies within these 4 groups. Betas, calabetas, and PMDs are some of my favorite fly patterns to fish because of the large number of them that can be found on most spring creeks. During the cooler months of the year, betas, calabetas, and PMDs will begin their hatch around mid-morning to mid-afternoon. In the warmer months, they will often begin hatching earlier in the day, and cloudy days will often produce the most prolific hatches. Because fish spend a lot of their time feeding on or near the bottom of a stream, it's only natural that you'd want your flies to drift along the bottom. However, if a hatch is taking place or you're fishing a spring creek, where you can see the fish are higher in the water, you might consider fishing an emerging caddis or mayfly. If you're fishing a spring creek, the most exciting way to fish an emerging insect pattern is to fish it without an indicator. If you're fishing without an indicator, you'll want to pay close attention to the movement of the leader and the fish. They may move only slightly as the fish takes your fly.
Oh, man.
Even though midges hatch year-round, mayfly nymphs and caddis pupa are often a better choice to fish in the summer because of their larger size. Fishing without an indicator is a lot of fun and a good technique for catching wary fish on a spring creek. However, It may take some practice to learn how to detect a strike when fishing without one. Until then, you might try fishing with a smaller indicator when you're fishing to wary fish that are in clear and shallow water. An easy way to attach a small indicator is to form a couple of loops in your leader. It is important that you go towards your fly line while forming this knot. After having made the second loop, reach through with your forceps and pull it back through the first loop. This will give you a knot that will hold your indicator in place. These indicators can be made by doubling or tripling a small piece of indicator yarn. After the yarn has been placed in the loop and the loop has been tightened, you can cut and shape your indicator. During a hatch, fish move into clear, slow-moving water. Fish move into these places so they can better see the insects that they are feeding on. Because the water is flowing slower, they will have even more time to examine our flies. When the fish are in this type of water, it is easy for them to see the flaws that are in the flies, and it is also easy for them to detect larger leaders. Both of these things can cause a fish to quickly reject your flies. If I find that the fish are keying on insects that are sizes 18 and smaller, I'll often fish with a smaller indicator and lighter tippets when fishing in water that is clear and shallow. Some of my favorite small flies are midge patterns, especially in the wintertime when other hatches are sparse. Midges are small in size, yet prevalent in nature. For a long time I paid little attention to midges, thinking they were too small to be an important part of a fish's diet. But after pumping the stomachs of some of the larger fish that I was catching, I noticed that most of the time midges were the main part of their diet. I realized that if I was going to be successful at fly fishing, I would have to learn how to fish these tiny insects. Midges are so small, fish have to constantly feed on them in order to get enough to grow. This means that fly fishermen will have plenty of opportunities to catch fish while fishing midge patterns. Midges have 3 stages that can be fished effectively: larva, pupa, and adult. I have enjoyed success fishing all 3 stages, but the most effective time to fish a midge is while it's in its pupa stage. This is the stage when they are in the open water and are the most vulnerable to fish. While midges are in their pupa stage, it'll often take 2 to 3 tries to make it from the bottom of the stream to the surface of the water. Once they reach the surface, midges will require time before they merge into adults. This whole process can take over an hour from start to finish.
Beautiful. Look at the size of it. That's one nice fish. That's one we come after right there. Beautiful fish.
Stoneflies are another aquatic insect that can be found in many streams. The highest number of them can be found in cold water that flows fast and has a high level of oxygen. Most stoneflies will take from 1 to 3 years to mature into adults, and will range in size from approximately 6 millimeters up to 50 millimeters. The best opportunity to catch a fish with a stonefly is when they are emerging to the side of the stream, where they will transform into adults. Another good time to catch them is when the female adult returns back to the water to lay her eggs. Stoneflies are awkward flyers and will often get caught in the water while depositing their eggs, and will once again be vulnerable to the fish. Fishing stonefly patterns dead drift is a good technique to imitate the naturals. because stoneflies are poor swimmers and will move very little as they drift downstream. Fly fishing during a hatch can be exciting and very productive. It can also be complicated because of the multiple hatches that take place. After identifying which insects the fish are keen on, you'll then be required to figure out what stage or what stages they are feeding on. If you're not sure which insects are hatching, local fly shops can be helpful. By closely watching the rise of a fish, you can tell if it is taking adult or pre-adult insects. When they are taking pre-adult insects, you'll see a bulge in the water, or you'll see the fish just slightly break the surface with its head and then its tail. If a fish is taking adult insects, only its nose will break the surface of the water. During a hatch, fish will often key on both the emergers and the adult, so I will often fish the two together. Most fly fishers prefer to fish them 12 to 24 inches apart. Since most emergers float low in the water and are often difficult to see, I will watch the more visible adult patterns. Fish will key on the pre-adult stages of an insect a couple hours prior to their hatch.
Beautiful.
This is the time when the insects are in the open water and are the most vulnerable to fish. So I will often begin fishing pre-adult fly patterns a couple of hours prior to a hatch. Since some of the larger fish are reluctant to take the adult flies, fishing pre-adult patterns is often the best way to catch some of the largest fish.
Got it. Man, look at that. Look at this beautiful fish. Look at those colors on him.
The Green River in the northeast part of Utah has some of the best scenery and the most prolific hatches. Because of the prolific hatches that take place on the lower Green, there are times when fishing an emerger along with an adult can produce just as many fish as drifting a couple of nymphs along the bottom of a river. If a fish is consistently taking flies off the surface of the water, with the right fly and a good presentation, there's a good chance that you can catch that fish. Let's start with presentation, because if your fly doesn't look and act like its natural counterpart, you'll have very little success, even with the best fly patterns. Getting a dead drift is one of the most important parts of a good presentation. The two easiest ways I know to get a dead drift are: first, make a cast that'll put your fly and your fly line in the same current. Second, fish with a leader that is at least 9.5 feet long. Longer leaders will land on the water with extra slack, which will allow your flies to dead drift a little further. After you've developed the skills it takes to get a natural drift, choose a fly that'll match the hatch, or one that'll match the terrestrials that are in the area where you'll be fishing. Caddis, midges, mayflies, and terrestrials are some of my favorite dry flies to fish in the summer. One of the things I like about terrestrials is that they can be fished in a lot of different ways, such as skittering them across the surface. However, this technique is only effective in the summer, when there's a lot of moss in the stream and the fish are high in the water. Unlike smaller flies that I like to fish in slower water, I like fishing larger terrestrials in the type of water that will help hide the heavier leaders that are required to cast them, such as runs, riffles, and along the edge of a stream where they are likely to fall in. Another thing I like about the larger terrestrials is that they are tied on larger hooks. Along with the heavier leaders, this will allow you to land the fish faster, causing them less stress, which will in turn allow the fish to recover quickly after they've been released. By using the reflection off the surface of the water and its peripheral vision, a fish can see almost everything that surrounds it. So it is important that we wear clothing that will blend in with our surroundings. Keep a low profile and move slowly without making any sudden movements. Large and small terrestrials can be effectively fished below the surface of the water. The best way that I found to do this is to dead drift them with just enough weight to slowly sink them to the bottom of a stream. A small split shot 3 to 4 inches ahead of the terrestrial should do the trick. Another advantage of fishing larger terrestrials, such as crickets and grasshoppers, is that the fish are not normally as selective. After a trout has been accustomed to feeding on terrestrials for a while, they learn that it will take only a couple of terrestrials to supply them with enough food to last a day. Unlike the smaller insects, which would require a trout to eat a much higher number to produce the same amount of calories. My favorite way to fish a terrestrial is with a dropper. If there's a lot of fish taking flies off the surface, I like the dropper to be within 18 inches of the terrestrial. If the fish are only occasionally coming to the top, the dropper may be more effective if it is fished closer to the bottom. Because midges hatch year-round and are a large part of a trout's diet, they are one of the most popular droppers. However, in the summer when caddis and mayflies are hatching, they can be just as effective. If you need help selecting the right flies, most fly shops can give you the latest information on which hatches are taking place and what terrestrials are in the area. In the early part of summer, aquatic insects are a larger part of a trout's diet than the terrestrials are. By the middle of summer, terrestrials and aquatic insects are equally proportioned in a fish's diet. So in the middle of summer, I will often fish aquatic insects and terrestrials together. In late summer, terrestrials will become a larger part of a trout's diet. In the fall, midges and betas are a few of the insects that will still be hatching. So in the fall, I will limit the aquatic insects that I fish with a terrestrial to midges and betas patterns. Spring creeks are well known for their large population of insects. Many spring creeks also contain a large number of sculpin. Fishing patterns that imitate these small fish is yet another way you can catch the large trout that occupy many of these waters.
That's a good fish. Good hot. Yeah. I can't just keep the line in that. I get the second one. That's juicy. Got it. I got him before I could even get a second one. Get going. That's huge. Oh, look.
Streamers are often fished by themselves. Adding a trailer fly will increase the number of fish you catch while fishing streamer patterns. A common technique used to fish streamers is to cast them up and across a stream. After waiting 15 to 20 seconds, begin retrieving them with a slow or fast stripping technique. It is important that streamers are allowed time to sink to the bottom before you begin retrieving them. Streamers can also be fished dead drift with or without a strike indicator. Streamer patterns are also effective when it comes to catching many of the sea-run fish. One of the keys to catching these fish with a streamer is to dead drift them as close as possible to their mouth. Over the year, this tactic has proven itself over and over again. While fishing in clear water, I have noticed that if a salmon has to move more than a couple inches to take my flies, chances are they will reject them. In our next video, we will travel to Alaska, where I will go into more detail about the flies, location, and the techniques that you'll need to catch many of these large and harder fighting sea-run fish, which will include sockeye, steelhead, and king salmon. Learning the migratory tendencies of these fish will be the key to having success. Salmon will rest behind rocks, in pools, and in the quiet water that is often found along the edge of a river. It is in these places that salmon are most often caught. Being patient is important when it comes to catching salmon. While fishing to a typical trout, we'll often make 6 to 7 casts and then move on to another spot. While fishing to a sea-run salmon, it may take 30 or more casts before they become interested enough to take your flies.
That thing's a mile up the river.
The drive set tight enough?
I tightened it up as it was going up.
Reel him in.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best there. There he goes. He's coming back. Well, that took off like a shot.
I wouldn't crank on it. I mean, yeah, if you pulled hard enough, probably could straighten it, but it's a good hook set and it shouldn't. There's no way she's ready yet, though.
It was doing pretty good at getting it in there for a little while. Did that get tangled up or?
No, I would come down here though.
That's good.